The world had shrunk to the size of a frozen ditch, 10 yards long, 3 feet deep, and smelling of pine, stale sweat, and cordite. For 3 days this ditch had been the entire universe for the 14 surviving men of Able Company's 2nd platoon. Above them, the sky was a lid of solid, oppressive grey. Around them, the Ardennes forest was a silent, snow-choked maze of dark pines, each one a potential hiding place for a German Jäger. The cold was the worst part. It wasn't just cold, it was a physical weight, a presence that crept into their bones, making the metal of their M1s a torture to touch and their trigger fingers numb and useless. Private Silas Croft felt the cold more than most, or perhaps he just complained about it less. He was a quiet man, small-boned and neat in his movements, with the patient eyes of an observer. Back in Ohio, he'd been a farmer, a man who raised racing pigeons. This skill, so esoteric and useless in basic training, had relegated him to the Signal Corps, a pigeon boy. The other men, hard-bitten infantrymen like Sergeant Rocco and PFC Miller, treated him with a kind of gentle ridicule. He was the mascot, the guy who carried birds in a wicker basket. Then, an hour ago, a German mortar team, zeroing in on the thin wisp of smoke from their sputtering radio, had found its mark. The whoomp thud was sickeningly accurate. The explosion had sent shrapnel and shattered pieces of the radio, their only link to command, spinning through the air. A man named Diaz had caught a piece in the throat. Dr. Hayes was still working on him, but the shallow, gurgling breaths told a story no one wanted to hear. Rocco, his face a mask of frozen mud and stubble, kicked the smoking metal casing of the radio. Damn it to hell! We're cut off, completely! Miller, a loud, jumpy man from Chicago, was rocking on his heels. We're dead! They're gonna roll right over us! We're dead! Shut your hole, Miller! Rocco snapped it. He ran a gloved hand over his helmet, his mind racing. They were 5 miles inside the German bulge, a pocket of resistance that command thought was a crossroads. But it wasn't. It was a trap. And now, they couldn't warn anyone. They had vital intelligence, a full panzer column, tiger tanks and half-tracks, massing in the valley below the nearby hamlet of St. Vith, preparing for a morning assault on a key bridge over the Author River. If that bridge fell, the entire line would collapse. Silas, who had been huddled over his own pack, finally spoke. His voice was soft, barely cutting through the wind. "Sergeant?" Rocco turned. "What is it, Croft?" "Your bird's got a complaint?" Silas ignored the jibe. He carefully lifted a small wicker cage from his insulated pack. Inside, a single dark-chested carrier pigeon cooed, its small black eye unblinking. "I've got Orville, sir. He's the last one." Miller actually laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "A bird? Oh, that's rich. We're going to trust a bird? In this blizzard? He'll freeze solid in 10 seconds. A pigeon sickle. That's what we got." Silas's jaw tightened. "Pigeons flew in the last war, Miller. Flew through shelling. This is a Signal Corps bird, best of the best. He's strong. He knows his way home to the loft in Bastogne. That's where command is." Rocco stared at the bird, then at Silas. The desperation in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else, a terrible, thin hope. "You're serious?" "Yes, sir." "The cold. It's bad," Silas admitted. "But the low-hanging clouds are worse. The hawks won't be flying. And the snow, it's supposed to let up around dawn." "Dawn," Rocco muttered. He looked at his watch. 0400. "The panzers move at 0600. We don't have until dawn." "I don't need until dawn," Silas said, a new, hard confidence in his voice. "I just need a clear spot, a high spot. We release him from this ditch. He'll hit the trees, or a German patrol will shoot him for sport. He needs height, to get above the fog line and get his bearings." Rocco knew what he meant. He pointed with his chin toward the skeletal ruin on the hill, about 800 yards away, across a snow-covered open field. The church. In the hamlet. Yes, sir, Silas said. The bell tower. That's high enough. That'll do it. Miller's jaw dropped. Across the field. That's a shooting gallery. The Krauts are dug in on the far side of that town, Sergeant. They got a sniper in that forest line. We know they do. He winged Peterson yesterday. We got no choice, Miller, Rocco said, his voice flat. He turned to Silas. You got the coordinates for the bridge? Silas nodded, pulling a small, flimsy message form and a pencil from his pocket. Doc-I. Hayes, his work on Diaz finished, looked up, his face grim. He's gone. He silently zipped up the private sleeping bag, a makeshift body bag. Rocco didn't flinch. The news just hardened his resolve. 14 men. And God knows how many more if that column breaks through. He looked at Silas. You can't go alone. Miller, you're on him. Cover his ass. Get Pigeon Boy to that church. Miller's face went white. Me? Sergeant, I'm the BAR. I'm needed here for... That's an order, Private, Rocco roared, his voice cracking in the frigid air. You're the best shot we got besides me. You keep that sniper's head down. Now go, both of you. And Croft? Silas, who was tucking the wicker cage inside his greatcoat, paused. Don't screw this up. I won't, sir, Silas said. He looked at the cage. Orville won't. The 800-yard field was an eternity of white. It was a gently sloping pasture, dotted with the dark, frozen shapes of dead cows, their legs sticking stiffly in the air. The snow was a foot deep, a pristine, beautiful blanket that would register their every move, every footprint. Stay low. Crawl. And don't bunch up, Miller hissed, his breath pluming. 10 yards apart, and for God's sake be quiet. Silas nodded, his M1 slung tight on his back. His focus was on the wicker cage, which he held against his chest with one arm. The bird's warmth was a tiny, living ember against his ribs. It was, perhaps, the only truly warm thing in the Ardennes. They moved out, dropping over the lip of the ditch. The snow was soft and powdery, a fresh layer that had fallen in the night. It muffled their movements, but it also made the going agonizingly slow. It was a low crawl, elbows and knees, pushing their rifles ahead of them. The cold was immediate. It bit at any exposed skin. Silas's hands, even in their wool gloves, were the first to go. His fingers began to ache, then burn, then lose feeling. This was his greatest fear. His hands were everything. He needed them to open the cage, to attach the message capsule, to release the bird. If his fingers were frozen, useless clubs, the mission was a failure. He flexed them, over and over inside his gloves. Feel. Just feel. 50 yards. The silence was absolute. No gunfire, no engines, just the shush of their bodies sliding through the snow and the ragged sound of their own breathing. 100 yards. Silas's face was frozen, his eyelashes clinging with ice. The church tower looked impossibly far, a dark finger pointing at the grey sky. Whip-crack. The sound was sharp, intimate, and terrifying. It passed so close to Silas's head that he felt the air part. He and Miller flattened themselves instantly, faces pressed into the snow, which smelled of ice and earth. "Sniper!" Miller hissed, his voice trembling. "I told you! He's in the trees on the right flank." Another crack. This one thudded into the frozen carcass of a cow 10 feet to their left. "He's got us pinned," Miller whispered, his eyes wide with panic. "We're done. We're dead. I can't even see his muzzle flash." Silas lay still. His heart was a trapped bird in his own chest. But beneath the fear, something else took over. The farmer's patience, the pigeon keeper's eye. He was a man who had spent thousands of hours staring at the sky, watching for the telltale speck of a peregrine falcon. He knew how to look. He scanned the tree line, not for a flash, but for a shape that was wrong. Not for a rifle, but for a shadow that was too deep. The German sniper was good. He was using smokeless powder. He was hidden. "Don't move, Miller," Silas whispered. "What do you think I'm doing?" "Sightseeing?" Silas ignored him. He eased his head up, just an inch. The snow on his helmet provided camouflage. He looked and looked. Nothing. Just trees. Dark, snow-laden pines. Then he saw it. It wasn't a man. It was breath. About 300 yards out, at the base of a large, snow-covered log pile, a tiny faint puff of vapor. It appeared, then vanished, appeared, then vanished. The sniper was breathing. Silas's mind, usually so quiet, became sharp and clear. "Log pile," he whispered, his voice impossibly calm. 300 yards. 11 o'clock. He's at the base. Miller squinted. His own breath held. "I don't see—" "Just trust me," Silas said. "I see his breath." Miller stared at him for a second. "Pigeon boy," he muttered. But he unslung his BAR, easing the bipod out and digging it into the snow. "Okay, farmer. You get one shot at this. When I fire, you run. Don't crawl. Run. Straight for the church. Don't stop for anything. You got it? What about you? I'm gonna make that Kraut bastard keep his head down. Now get ready." Miller took a deep breath. "Now." The world exploded in sound. Miller opened up with the bar, the brrrrrap of the heavy automatic rifle shattering the silence. He wasn't aiming to kill. He was aiming to terrorize. He stitched the entire log pile with .30 caliber rounds, sending snow, bark, and dirt flying. Crack! The sniper fired back, but it was wild, panicked. "Go, Silas! G.O.!" Silas was on his feet. He'd never run so fast in his life, his clumsy boots sinking, his lungs burning, his arm clamped around the precious cage. The church was 700 yards away. It felt like 700 miles. He ran, head down, his helmet feeling heavy and useless. He could hear Miller's bar hammering away behind him, and the sharp, angry crack of the sniper's rifle in response. He didn't look back. He just ran for the dark, gaping hole that was the church doorway. The snow deepened. His legs were rubber. His lungs were on fire. He slipped, went to one knee, and a bullet whined past his ear. He scrambled up, his only thought, Orville, Orville, Orville. 50 yards, 20, 10. He dove, shoulder first, into the darkness of the church, sliding on a floor of icy stone and rubble. He lay there, gasping, as the sound of Miller's BAR suddenly stopped. The silence that flooded in was terrifying. "Miller?" he whispered, but he knew the man couldn't hear him. He was alone. The church was a skeleton. The roof was gone, replaced by the grey sky. Snow fell gently on the smashed pews and the debris-covered altar. It was eerily quiet, the stone walls muffling the distant, sporadic gunfire. Silas huddled behind a collapsed stone pillar, his body shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline. He had to get to the tower. He checked the cage. Orville was ruffled, but calm. The bird's resilience gave him courage. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and made for the back of the church. The door to the belfry was still on its hinges, a heavy oak door. He pulled it open, the sound of the hinges screaming in the silence. A spiral stone staircase, slick with ice, led up into the darkness. Climbing was a nightmare. His hands were numb. His boots kept slipping. He held the cage in one hand, using the other to brace himself against the curved stone wall. He climbed past the first landing, where the massive, silent bell ropes hung like dead vines. He kept going, up into the belfry itself. He emerged into a square room, open to the elements on all four sides, through massive arched windows. The wind howled, cutting him to the bone. This was it. This was the high place. From here he could see for miles, the snow-covered forest, the winding river. and far in the distance, the bridge, with the dark, ant-like shapes of the panzer column waiting. He set the cage down in a sheltered corner, out of the direct wind, and realized he was not alone. In the far corner, huddled under a grey blanket and a pile of burlap sacks, was a figure, a German soldier. Silas's M1 was off his shoulder and at his hip in a second. "Hände hoch!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Hands up!" The figure moved slowly. A head emerged. It wasn't a battle-hardened SS trooper. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 16, with pale, terrified-looking eyes and a face raw with cold. A Hitlerjunge. His rifle, a Mauser, was leaning against the wall 5 feet away from him. He was shivering so violently he could barely raise his hands. "Bitter," the boy whispered. "Kalt, so kalt. Please, cold, so cold." He wasn't a threat. He was a scout or a runner, just trying to get out of the wind. Silas's training screamed at him. "Shoot him. He's the enemy. He'll kill you when you turn your back." But Silas was a farmer. He was a man who mended fences, not a man who killed. And this was a child, frozen and terrified. He stared at the boy. The boy stared back, his eyes wide with fear, looking at the American soldier and the strange wicker cage he'd brought with him. Silas made a decision. It wasn't a soldier's decision. It was his. He gestured with his rifle barrel. "In die Ecke," in the corner. "Stay there. Don't move." The boy, understanding the gesture, if not the words, nodded frantically and pressed himself deeper into the corner. Silas turned his back on him. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever done. He was trusting his life to the mercy of his enemy. He knelt by the cage. "Okay, Orville," he whispered, his frozen fingers fumbling with the latch. "Time to go." He pulled the small message capsule form from his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly from cold and fear that he could barely hold the pencil. He wrote the coordinates for the bridge, the time, and the description. "Panzer column. Tigers. Urgent. Strike. Strike." He signed it with his platoon's call sign. He gently took Orville from the cage. The bird's body was a furnace, a vibrant, shocking pocket of life in the midst of all this death. The bird blinked, unafraid. "You know the way, boy," Silas murmured, his breath pluming. "Home. Go home." He fumbled with the tiny aluminum canister, trying to attach it to the bird's leg. His fingers were useless. He couldn't get the clasp to close. He cursed, pulling off his glove and trying with his bare hand. The metal of the canister instantly seared his skin with cold. He felt the German boy watching him. Every nerve in his back was screaming. He's getting his rifle. He's standing up. He's aiming. But no shot came. Finally, the canister snapped shut. Silas stood, his bare hand on fire with pain, and walked to the largest open archway. The wind hit him like a fist, nearly tearing the bird from his grasp. Orville flapped his wings, instinctively fighting the gale. "Go home," Silas whispered. He held the bird aloft, a priest making an offering. He threw Orville, not up, but out, launching him into the grey, swirling chaos of the sky. The bird dropped, caught by the wind, and Silas's heart dropped with him. Orville seemed to fall 10, 20 feet, a dark speck against the snow. Then his wings caught. He beat them, a powerful, rapid stroke, and began to climb. He circled the church tower. Once, twice. Silas watched, holding his breath. The German boy had crept forward and was watching too, his face a mixture of confusion and awe. Ein Vogel, a bird. Crack! The rifle shot was not from the tower, it was from the field. The other sniper, Miller's sniper. Orville faltered in the air. A single, dark feather puffed from his wing. He tumbled, and Silas cried out, a raw, wordless sound. Crack! Another shot. But the sniper was in a bad position, firing almost straight up. He'd missed the body. Then the most impossible thing happened. The German boy in the tower cursed, a high-pitched Scheiße. He scrambled, not for his blanket, but for his Mauser. Silas spun, raising his M1, thinking the boy was going to shoot him, or the bird. But the boy didn't aim at Silas. He didn't even aim at the pigeon. He ripped the action back on his rifle, jammed it to his shoulder, aimed out the other window toward the log pile, and fired. K-A-P-O-W. The shot was an answer. He was firing at the other sniper. He was covering the bird. Crack! The sniper in the field fired again, this time at the belfry. The bullet sparked off the stone, inches from Silas's head. K-A-P-O-W. The German boy fired again. It was madness. An American pigeon handler and a Hitler Youth sniper, side by side in a Belgian church tower, fighting a different German sniper in a field below. Orville, his wing damaged but not broken, had found his bearing. He'd stopped circling. He was climbing, higher and higher, a determined, beating speck. He cleared the fog line, broke through the low clouds, and was gone. Silence. The sniper in the field stopped firing. Silas and the German boy looked at each other. The air in the belfry was thick with the smell of their two rifles. The boy was breathing hard, his eyes still wide, but not with fear. With something else. Silas didn't know what to say. He looked at the boy. The boy looked at him. Finally, Silas just nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin. The German boy, after a long second, nodded back. Silas picked up the empty wicker cage. He slung his M1 over his shoulder. He walked to the stairwell, and, without looking back, began the long, cold climb down. He left the German boy in the tower. He was supposed to take him prisoner. He was supposed to shoot him. He did neither. Getting back to the ditch was a different kind of hell. The sniper was still out there, but Miller's BAR was quiet. Silas crawled, his heart heavy, assuming the worst. He found Miller in a shallow depression, his BAR gone, a dark stain spreading on his leg. You made it, pigeon boy. Miller coughed, his face pale. You're hit. No kidding. Sniper got me when I reloaded. He grabbed Silas's jacket. The bird. You get him out? He's away, Silas said, pulling out his field dressing. Winged, but he's away. Winged. Miller laughed, then groaned. Just perfect. A winged pigeon. Silas wrapped the dressing, his hands now so cold he could barely tie the knot. We'll get you back. He did. It took an hour. He half-dragged, half-carried Miller the last 200 yards, the sniper taking pot-shots at them the whole way. But the snow and the rising fog saved them. He tumbled back into their ditch with Miller's unconscious body, collapsing from exhaustion. Rocco and Hayes dragged them in. He's hit bad, Silas panted. But he's alive. The bird. Orville. He's away. He was hit, Sergeant. In the wing. I don't know. Rocco's face was unreadable. He looked at Silas, this quiet, unassuming man, covered in snow, his hands bleeding, who had just crossed 1,600 yards of open hell. All we can do is wait, Croft, Rocco said. Get your hands warm. The wait was the longest part. The snow started again, thick and heavy. The world went silent. Diaz's body was stiff. Miller was groaning. Hayes, feeding him sips of snow, melted over a tiny shielded flame. An hour passed. The men sat in silence, each lost in his own cold misery. 2 hours. The panzers in the valley below began to rumble. The sound of their engines was a deep, guttural promise of death. They were getting ready. 0530. Miller, in a moment of lucidity, looked at Silas. A bird, he whispered, and tried to laugh. Silas just stared at his hands, which he couldn't feel at all. He had failed. The bird was wounded. He'd probably died, frozen in a field 10 miles from here. And he'd let a German sniper live. He was a failure as a soldier, and a failure as a pigeon handler. Rocco pulled a grenade, his last one. "Get ready, boys," he said, his voice heavy. "We sell these holes dear." And then it came. It wasn't the sound of tanks. It was a high, thin whistle, a sound like a tearing sheet, far, far away. The whistle grew into a shriek, then a roar. Whoomp, 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 whoomp. The ground shook. Miles away, on the other side of the hamlet, the sky lit up with flashes of brilliant, terrible orange. A rolling thunder that was not thunder. Rocco was on his feet, staring. "Artillery!" he breathed. That's our artillery." They watched, dumbfounded, as the American 155mm guns, firing from Bastogne, walked their shells up and down the valley of the Orth River. They could hear the secondary explosions, the sound of ammunition cooking off. They were hitting the panzers. They were hitting the bridge. The German offensive from this sector was over before it began. The shelling lasted 10 minutes. And then, silence. The men in the ditch just looked at each other, their faces, illuminated by the distant fires, slack with disbelief. Miller was staring at Silas. He wasn't laughing. Sergeant Rocco turned, his hard face cracked by a grim smile. He looked at Silas, who was still just sitting, staring at his empty, frozen hands. Rocco didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't pat him on the back. He just reached into his own pack, pulled out his last D-ration bar, a hard, bitter piece of chocolate, and broke it in two. He tossed half to Silas. "Good work, soldier." Silas looked at the chocolate, then at Rocco. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He tucked the chocolate into his pocket. He'd save it for later. He was the pigeon handler. He was the quiet man. And he had just held the fate of the line in his bare, frozen hands. He leaned his head back against the icy wall of the ditch, closed his eyes, and thought of a brave bird flying home.